Deep in the Amazon, there are tribes still fighting to stay hidden from the modern world. And as the forest disappears around them, these tribes are being pushed closer to the edge of extinction. Out in the deep jungles of Peru, there's a tribe that's about as isolated as you can get. The Namole, or Mashkopiro, live in total seclusion in the Manu National Park, which is so rich in wildlife, it's practically its own world. For years, they've avoided contact with outsiders, but in more recent years, they've started to pop up now and then, mainly to get food or supplies from local settlements. And while that does sound nice, this can actually be pretty dangerous. There's a huge concern because any exposure to the modern world could wipe them out, with diseases that they have no immunity to. Even basic stuff like the flu or a cold could be fatal, and there have been some violent cases. Back in 2015, a local guide was killed by a bamboo-tipped arrow, which is believed to have come from a Namole tribe member trying to protect their space. The Peruvian government's response has been to keep parts of their land as protected areas to prevent more outsiders from encroaching, but it's a fine line. They're trying to protect them while also respecting their wish to stay out of the modern world. The Karubo tribe are also sometimes referred to as the Clubbers. They do not listen to EDM music. They're called the Clubbers because big wooden clubs are their preferred weapons. They're one of Brazil's most notorious uncontacted tribes. They live deep in the Amazon, where they've managed to keep their distance from the outside world for centuries. Things started to get shaky for them back in the 70s though, when outsiders, including government officials and missionaries, tried to reach them. They've been known to react aggressively to anyone they see as a threat, and there have been cases of them ambushing people who wander too close to their territory. With that said though, there have been some peaceful interactions. Like most isolated tribes though, they're under constant threat from loggers and miners who don't care about their boundaries. There are so many isolated tribes in Brazil's Amazon. One of the most famous photos shows a few people from an uncontacted tribe hiding behind the jungle, aiming arrows at an outsider taking pictures. It's a reminder that for these tribes, the outside world is not a place they want to be. The Brazilian government tracks these groups through photos and aerial surveys, trying to make sure that they just stay protected. But with illegal loggers constantly creeping in on their land, their survival is at a serious risk. These tribes are living in some of the most biodiverse areas on Earth, but their homes are being wiped out bit by bit as the forest disappears. Experts like Jose Carlos Morales Jr. have been working for decades to help protect these tribes, but with more threats from outside, it's a tough battle. The Toramona tribe is another group that fiercely guards its territory. They live deep in the Madidi and Heath rivers, far from modern life, but not far enough, apparently. Oil companies and workers have started to creep in. Back in 2016, a group of workers from a Chinese oil company ran into them while they were cutting through the forest. They came across some broken branches, footprints, and there were also a bunch of tortoise shells scattered around. But then they started hearing shouting from deeper in the trees. Moments later, the Toramona showed up and made it very clear they weren't cool with uninvited guests stomping through their territory. The oil company ended up backing off after that, but the damage was already done. Even one brief contact like that can be dangerous. The Toramona are super vulnerable to outside diseases since they have little to no exposure to the modern world, and what makes it worse is that the Bolivian government has spent years pretending that they don't even exist, which of course makes it harder for groups to fight for their protection. Meanwhile, companies just keep sniffing around trying to tap into the land's resources. Living on the edge of extinction, the Kawahiva people are one of the most elusive and isolated tribes in Brazil. They live in the Rio Pardo region of Mato Grosso and are known to be nomadic, meaning they rarely stay in one place for long. The Kawahiva are incredibly secretive, and most of what's known about them comes from the things they leave behind, like tools, arrows, bits of food. They've been under constant threat, mainly from illegal loggers and land developers who try to push them out of their territory. Even though there are technically laws in place to protect them, like the Rio Pardo indigenous area, enforcement has been lax, and their land just keeps getting encroached on. There have been cases where arrests have been made, but more often than not, loggers and squatters just seem to get away with it. The Awa, often called the forest people, are one of the most endangered tribes on the planet. They live deep in Brazil's Maranhão state And while there are about 350 of them in total, only around 100 are still uncontacted. But for them, the outside world is a very real and constant threat. Their history of isolation goes back to the 1800s, when settlers started cutting through their land. That forced the Awa into more of a nomadic lifestyle, always moving, always trying to stay one step ahead of outsiders. Even though their territory was officially protected in 2003, thanks to pressures from advocacy groups like Survival International, it hasn't stopped the invasion. Illegal loggers are still sneaking in and tearing up the forest, putting the tribe's entire way of life at risk. And it's not just trees being taken, it's lives as well. There's an awful case from 2011 where a young Awa boy was killed by loggers. So sure, there are laws on paper, but there's not enough enforcement on the ground. The Tigiri are one of the most remote tribes in the Ecuadorian Amazon. They originally split off from the Huarani people back in the late 60s, mainly because they didn't want anything to do with the missionaries who were trying to convert them. Since then, they've completely cut themselves off, not just from outsiders, but even from other Huarani groups. They've stuck to their own path, living deep in the forest and avoiding any contact with the outside world. But it's not like they've been left alone. Their land sits right on top of some valuable oil reserves, which means oil companies and loggers are of course creeping in. The Tigiri don't take that lightly. There's been violent clashes with intruders, and they've made it very clear they're not interested in talking. They want people to stay out, period. No one knows exactly how many are left, but it's estimated there are only about 20 to 30. The Yanomami people are one of the largest uncontacted tribes in the world, living in the remote borderlands between Brazil and Venezuela. This is a pretty large group. There are around 35,000, so they're no strangers to contact with the outside, but there are still a handful of smaller groups that are still very isolated. Fortunately, the tribe's land is in an area where there's lots of gold to be mined, so you can see where this is going. For decades, miners have been encroaching on their territory. The consequences have been pretty disastrous for the tribe. Illegal gold miners have brought with them diseases like malaria, which have devastated the tribe's population. There have also been cases where miners have resorted to violence to force them off their land. Back in 2019, the Brazilian government said that they were thinking about opening up Yanomami land for mining, which would have been a total disaster for them. It would have meant more outsiders showing up, bringing diseases, violence, and a whole lot of unwanted attention. The Yanomami have already dealt with enough of that. Groups like Survival International have been fighting to keep that from happening, constantly pushing for their land to stay protected. But the pressure from mining companies and other outsiders hasn't really gone away. West Papua is home to a number of uncontacted tribes deep in the rainforests, and unlike the tribes we've talked about in places like Brazil, these groups don't have government protection. While in places like Brazil, there's agencies like FUNAI that step in to protect the tribes, in West Papua, there's basically nothing in place to stop outsiders from disturbing the tribes. This part of Indonesia is super remote, and a lot of the tribes have stayed hidden from the modern world for that reason, but they've still been under pressure for years. Logging, mining, oil, military activity. One of the only groups actively trying to help is Survival International. They try to raise awareness about these uncontacted tribes, but they're also careful not to share too much. Like, they avoid giving out exact locations or specific details about the people, because the last thing anyone wants is missionaries or other groups going in and trying to make contact. That would be a disaster, not just because of the risk of spreading disease, but also because it's just annoying. The Ayoreo live around the border of Bolivia and Paraguay. Most of them have had some contact with the outside world, but there's still a small group, about 100 or so, who live in complete isolation. They're split into smaller groups, with some up north in the Gran Chaco and others farther south. Like a lot of uncontacted tribes, the Ayoreo are constantly under threat. Cattle ranching, deforestation, land being sold off. These things are pushing deeper into their territory. There are laws that say that they have a right to their land, but those don't always mean much. Some landowners just pretend that there aren't any tribes there at all, or they flat out just ignore the rules and keep grabbing land anyway. Missionaries have also been a big problem over the years. They've tried to convert the tribe and drag them into a world that they never asked to be a part of.
The Bajau tribe, who are still around today, pretty much never leave the sea, and they have evolved to become some of the world's best freedivers. While they don't actually live underwater, they do spend on average about 6 hours a day, or 60% of their time underwater. The members of this tribe have evolved to dive to depths of over 70 meters, that's 229.5 feet, and they are able to hold their breath for up to 13 minutes at a time. These incredible adaptations come from generations of the tribe's ancestors living on and in the water. Over time, the spleens of the Bajau people have become much larger than the average human, which allows them to take in much more oxygen when their spleens contract. The diet of the Bajau, also known as sea nomads, consists of mainly fish, which is to be expected, but a recent decline of fish in the areas where they reside, the coastal regions of Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Thailand, has unfortunately made it much more difficult for them to sustain themselves. Sea nomads typically live in one family unit consisting of 5 members, and they reside on small houseboats. These houseboats then travel together with the boats of other families, all of which come together for fishing and the organization of religious ceremonies. The Bajau learn to swim before they ever begin to walk, which is why they are so incredibly capable when it comes to maneuvering in the water. Along with the Bajau tribe, there are a few other sea tribes around. These include the Moken of southern Thailand, as well as the Orange Laut, which literally translates to the sea people. When asked how they would describe themselves, these seafaring communities often say they are born, they live, and they die on their boats, and the umbilical cords of their children are plunged into the sea. There are, however, a few exceptions to this rule, one being monsoon season, during which the Bajau people and the people of a few other Indonesian sea tribes gather on land to protect themselves from the harsh weather. It is believed that there are around 1.3 million Bajau people scattered across Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines, and the Sultanate of Brunei, with 345,000 residing in Indonesia alone. The Bajau are considered to be the main modern-day seafaring tribe, as their numbers far exceed the numbers of other tribes like the Orange Laut, who have a population of about 420,000 worldwide and just 17,500 in Indonesia. As for the Moken people, there are only about 2,000 to 3,000 total, and they generally live off the coasts of southern Thailand and Myanmar. Although the tribes live a pretty different lifestyle than our own, they do still communicate with members outside of their own communities. In fact, the members of the Bajau and Orange Laut tribes are quite friendly, which is why sometimes people will hire them to help with fishing expeditions, since they are the experts. As I mentioned, these seafaring tribes have adapted over many generations so that they are able to better survive in the ocean. But it's not just the spleens of the Bajau that have developed to be 50% larger than their land-based neighbors, but also the eyes of specifically the Moken children, which can see twice as well underwater than the average European eye. Why? Well, because not only have their eyes adapted to allow for lesser reddening, lesser irritation, and a less intense reaction to salt water, but they have also learned to contract their eyes incredibly well underwater, which allows them to get a much clearer look at the things around them, like small shells and other easily grabbable food. The ability to maximally constrict one's eyes underwater can be learned by others, but the skill goes away if it's not used regularly, kind of like muscle mass. Furthermore, it is much more difficult for adults to achieve this ability because of the fact that after puberty, the eye somewhat hardens, making the kind of extreme contractions required for the Moken underwater supervision much more difficult. Another adaptation possessed by none other than the Bajau is their skin's ability to sustain prolonged exposure to salt water. A group of specialists who visited the tribe described a white, scale-like layer with the appearance that kind of resembles ichthyosis, which is a dermatological issue. However, it's no issue for the Bajau. In fact, it's an asset. And it doesn't last forever either. A few months of washing with fresh water and avoiding the ocean put their skin pretty much back to its original state. Another thing the Bajau peoples do to adapt to life in the sea, and more specifically their free diving activities, is pierce their eardrums. You heard me. They pierce their eardrums at an early age so that they do not have to worry about equalizing when diving down to such extreme depths. This practice does have a downside though. I mean, they're literally piercing their eardrums, so it's no surprise that it causes many of the Bajau peoples to become hard of hearing when they get a little bit older in age, but to them it seems as though the pros really do outweigh the cons here. Alright, moving on from the tribes of the sea, let's talk about the Kappas. Unlike the sea nomads, which reside in reality, the Kappa tribe lives in Japanese folklore, but they are fascinating and pretty weird nonetheless. The Kappa, which are described as green human-like beings with webbed feet and hands, view themselves as gods, and they are said to become increasingly aggressive when not treated as such. They are known for their love of cucumbers, I'm not making this up, and their fondness of sumo wrestling. But wait, there's more. These creatures are often accused of attacking humans who swim in forbidden waters. Their go-to attack? Removing a mythical organ called the Shirikodama from their victim's hind nether region. Honestly, I don't know how they come up with this stuff. Grindylows are another mythological creature, this time belonging to British folklore and originating in Yorkshire. These creatures, like the Kappas, are depicted as humanoid with webbed hands, scaly skin, a greenish complexion, and incredibly sharp claws and teeth. Sometimes they are shown with feet, sometimes a long eel-like tail, and other times with appendages resembling octopus tentacles. These creatures are said to dwell in ponds and marshes, waiting for unsuspecting young people. When one comes along, the Grindylow grabs them and drags them down below the surface of the water. Oftentimes in Yorkshire, the tail of the Grindylows is used to keep young people and those who don't quite know how to swim away from pools, marshes, and ponds for their own safety. Whether or not these creatures are real is, I guess, up for debate, but personally, I'm not buying it. The Nereids, described in Greek mythology as the female spirits of the sea, are said to be the 50 daughters of the very busy old man in the sea, Nereus, and the also very busy Oceanid Doris. They also have a brother called Nereides, but for some reason the Nereids are much more popular, probably because there's 50 of them and only one Nereides. Anyways, the Nereids are believed to accompany Poseidon, the god of the sea, and unlike the mythological creatures known as sirens, these creatures are said to be quite friendly and even helpful towards sailors, which makes sense seeing as they are said to be a symbol of all things beautiful and kind about the sea. These creatures are generally depicted as beautiful goddesses, crowned with corals and draped in white robes, sometimes with legs, sometimes with tails, and sometimes with a combination of both. It's a real roll the dice kind of mythical creature. In Chinese culture, the worship of the 4 dragon kings is said to bring good weather and a bountiful harvest, as they are believed to be the rulers of water and weather. Each of the 4 dragon kings is responsible for governing their own corner of the Sea of China. The blue or green dragon king, Ao Guang, rules over the East China Sea. He is the essence of spring and is represented in the wood element, which symbolizes growth, health, new life, and peace. The red dragon, Ao Qin, governs the South China Sea. He is the essence of summer and is represented through fire. Since red is considered a lucky color in China, it is believed that the red dragon brings happiness, good fortune, and luck. The black dragon, Ao Shun, rules the North China Sea as well as Lake Baikal. He is the essence of winter, represented by the water element. He is believed to bring vengeance and catastrophes such as floods and storms. You do not want to mess with this guy. The 4th dragon is the white dragon, Ao Run, which governs the Lake Qingkai in the west. He is the essence of autumn and is represented by the metal element. This dragon symbolizes purity, but has also been associated with mourning and death. Now, I know I said there were only 4 dragon kings, which there are, but there are far more than 4 recognized dragons in Chinese culture. However, unlike the dragon kings believed to live in crystal castles in the oceans and lakes guarded by shrimps and crabs, these remaining dragons are believed to roam the land and skies. These are the yellow and gold dragons. The yellow dragon symbolizes royalty and is often depicted on the emperor's robes, as it is quite literally a symbol of the emperor. This dragon also represents authority, good fortune, and wisdom. And then there's the gold dragon, associated with the most powerful of deities. This dragon is a symbol of the highest forms of wealth, prosperity, strength, abundance, and power.
And we're starting off with the Sentinelese tribe, who live on North Sentinel Island in the Bay of Bengal. This is often referred to as the most dangerous island on Earth. Not only is it wrong to intrude on someone else's home for ethical reasons, but here it's also very dangerous. The Sentinelese are known to be very protective of their land, and people have met unfortunate ends after getting too close. The island is completely off limits to outsiders, but there's a recent case involving a man named John Allen Chow. who was a Christian missionary, part of an organization called All Nations. He trekked out to North Sentinel Island in 2018 with the goal of converting the tribe to Christianity, and seeing as I'm referring to him in past tense, it's pretty clear things did not end well for him. He began getting closer and closer to the island over a period of a few days, offering fish as an attempt to make a peaceful contact with them, but each time he would get close, he'd end up needing to retreat. At one point, a young tribesman even shot an arrow at him, which would have pierced Chow's chest if his Bible hadn't blocked it. Now, Chow saw this as a sign to keep pressing forward, and he made one final attempt the next day, telling the fisherman he was traveling with to leave him behind. And that was the last time he was seen alive. The fisherman later saw his body being dragged along the shore by members of the tribe. Next on the list we have Amazon tribes in Brazil. This image here was taken in 2008. It's pretty amazing. Clearly see 3 tribespeople, 2 who are pointing arrows right at the camera. This image, as well as many others, were taken as part of a project carried out by the National Indian Foundation, part of the Brazilian government, involved in the policies relating to uncontacted indigenous people. An uncontacted tribes expert named Jose Carlos do Reyes Morales Jr. made a statement about these images, which were captured near the Havari River Valley, stating, "We did the overflight to show their houses, to show they are there, to show they exist." He also discussed how these tribes are under threat from illegal loggers in Peru, going on to say, "What is happening in this region of Peru is a monumental crime against the natural world, the tribes, the fauna, and is further testimony to the complete irrationality with which we, the civilized ones, treat the world." And now we move on to Peru to discuss the Mashco-Piro tribe, also known as the Namol. Couldn't find a proper pronunciation of that, but the term Mashco translates to wild or savage, so definitely a more respectful term, which loosely means brothers and sisters or kin. They're a hunter-gatherer tribe that lives in the Manu National Park in Peru. They've actively avoided contact with outsiders for a long time, and there have been cases of violent conflicts with people who have tried to encroach on their territory, like the death of a local guide named Nicholas Flores. He was found with a bamboo-tipped arrow in his heart, and it's believed that the members of the Namole tribe were responsible. Now, around 2011, the tribe began being spotted a bit more often, reaching out to missionaries, tourists, and other locals for assistance. They started asking for food and tools, which puts the Peruvian government in a bit of a tough spot. It's important to remember that uncontacted people like this are very vulnerable, as they haven't built up the immunities we have to like all the diseases and illnesses that are common anywhere outside of their isolated communities. Next, we have the Toramona of Bolivia. This is an uncontacted tribe that lives in the upper Madidi and Heath rivers. In 2016, there were reports of encounters between workers involved in an oil exploration near the Peruvian border and this uncontacted tribe. The Bolivian State Oil Company, which had subcontracted the exploration work to BGP Bolivia, a subsidiary of a Chinese oil corporation, denied having these encounters at first. In August and September of 2016, workers clearing tracks through the forest started coming across footprints, broken branches, and empty tortoise shells, all showing there were people living out there. Then on September 17th, workers were surprised when they heard shouts from people nearby. BGP postponed work in the area and withdrew the workers. Then, a couple nights later, workers in their camp were surrounded by tribesmen believed to be from the same uncontacted group. Another indigenous group called the Tikana, who also live in the region, had previously warned against oil exploration, saying that it was a threat to the then uncontacted Toromona, but the president of the Bolivian state oil company denied the existence of an uncontacted tribe, stating, "The facts have been twisted. We will carry on with our work." This oil exploration would involve cutting hundreds of tracks through the forest and more than 61,000 small underground explosions in the Amazon's uncontacted frontier. With all the noise and workers, there was a very real risk of unplanned contact, not to mention encroaching on their home and endangering very vulnerable people. Again, exposing them to even common illnesses and diseases like the flu and measles could have killed them. Next on the list, we head back to Brazil to talk about the Caribou. This tribe has also been known to be very territorial, but for good reason. This indigenous tribe lives in the western Amazon basin. They choose to live in total isolation from the modern world. Their Portuguese name translates to clubbers because their preferred weapon is the club. FUNAI, Brazil's Agency for Indigenous Affairs, are the only group to have successfully made peaceful contact with the Caribou. They first tried in 1972, but that failed, and they stopped trying for a while after 7 of their workers died. But in 1996, they finally made some headway. The Caribou's main tribe, which is about a few hundred strong, separated from a smaller group and is still in complete isolation, but the smaller band have interacted with neighboring settlements and FUNAI employees over the years. FUNAI assists the tribe, giving them immunization shots and regular checkups. They've also established a national park to protect the Caribou's land from logging. Their goal is to preserve the tribe's way of life. Next on the list are the Awa, who have had a lot of issues with loggers. There are about 350 members of this tribe, and around 100 have zero contact with the outside world. Just like with all the tribes on this list, their isolation is very important to them, helping them avoid conflicts that have historically messed things up for them. And back in the 19th century, European settlers began clearing out their land, so the Awa were forced out of their land, becoming mostly nomadic. Fast forward to the 80s, some Awa moved to government settlements, but some have stuck to their traditional lifestyle, relying on their forest for everything they need. But in 1982, the Brazilian government got a massive loan, and part of the deal here was protecting the lands of certain indigenous groups, including the Awa. This was crucial because their forests were being invaded by outsiders, and the tribe was in danger of disappearing completely. Now, it took the Brazilian government a whopping 20 years to actually do something about it, but thanks to pressure from groups like Survival International, the Awa's land was officially marked as theirs in 2003. Sadly though, at that point their population had dropped pretty significantly because of encroachment and massacres. In 2011 things got even darker when illegal loggers burned a young member of the tribe alive who had wandered out of her village. This had been a warning to other indigenous groups. Between 2003 and 2010, around 450 indigenous people were killed, and investigators found loggers wrecking Awa camps. The Awa are facing the fastest deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. Moving on to Ecuador now, we have the Tigari. This is one of 2 Huarani tribes that currently live in the Ecuadorian Amazon basin. Back in 1968, this group separated from the Huarani families because they didn't want to accept the influence of missionaries, and since then they've had minimal contact with the outside world and even other Huarani groups. In the 90s, some Huarani groups moved westward to escape some of the stuff going on that was encroaching on their land, like petroleum exploration and logging, and the Tigiri were one of those groups. And they're very protective of their way of life. They do not put up with outsiders trying to encroach on them. They've attacked missionaries and anyone they see as threats to their isolation, and power to them. The tribe is very small. Of course, it's hard to say exactly how many there are, but it's estimated there's only about 20 to 30 members. Back to Brazil once again. Now we have the Cauahiva. The Cauahiva people are an uncontacted indigenous tribe in Brazil, living in the Rio Pardo region of Mato Grosso. It's estimated that there are at least 4 bands of uncontacted Cauahiva, with around 15 individuals in the region. This tribe is mostly nomadic and they're very rarely seen even by other indigenous groups. Most of what's seen from this tribe is just stuff they leave behind, like arrows, baskets and hammocks, sleeping mats. There are concerns that loggers intentionally keep them on the run, and there have been laws put forward to try and protect the tribe, like the Rio Pardo Indigenous Area designated in 2001. Legal protection has often been ignored, unfortunately, in the past, but there were arrests made in 2005. Businessmen, loggers, and squatters were found encroaching on the Kawahiba's land, but no one was ever tried. Legal protection was reinstated in 2007 and then intensified in 2012, creating an official reservation with more protective laws put in place. Next on the list we have the Ayoreo. Now, most of this tribe now has contact with the outside world, but there is still a small group living in total isolation. There are around 100 uncontacted Ayoreo people, divided into 6 to 7 groups. 3 of these groups are in the northern region of the Gran Chaco, along the border of Bolivia and Paraguay, and the other 3 to 4 groups are in the southern region of the territory. The biggest threats to these isolated groups are cattle farming and deforestation, the sale of their territory, searches for oil, and missionaries who want to enforce their beliefs on them. There are officially laws that grant the tribe the right to own their own land that they live on, preventing people from entering or selling it, but their land still gets redistributed. Some landowners will deny that there are tribes living there. And finally, we have the many uncontacted tribes living in the remote rainforests of West Papua. Now, unlike uncontacted tribes in Brazil, who have government protection, with groups like Funai, for example, there is no government protection in place for these tribes in West Papua. The human rights organization Survival International is one of the only groups petitioning to get laws in place to protect these tribes, wanting to raise awareness of their existence to help prevent encroachment on their land. At the same time, though, they also think it's important to keep details a bit vague, like their exact location and number of tribespeople. This can hopefully help prevent groups like missionaries from seeking them out.
At number 10 is the Sentinelese, which I'm getting out of the way now, as this tribe is a fan favorite on this channel. Inhabiting North Sentinel Island in the Bay of Bengal, these tribal people have maintained an unwavering resistance to their interactions with the outside world. Their stance is clear. They'll go to extremes to protect their isolation, even taking lethal measures against trespassers. The Indian government recognized the importance of leaving them be, designated by the island's tribal reserve in 1956, essentially saying, hands off everybody. Estimating their population isn't easy, naturally, with figures ranging from 15 to 500 individuals, but the probable range is about 15 to 200. These hunter-gatherers rely on bows and arrows for wildlife hunting and seafood gathering. Agriculture's role in their lives remain uncertain due to our lack of insight. And although brief contact was established in 1991, visits all halted in 97. Despite our curiosity, respecting their desire for solitude ultimately takes precedence. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Most Amazing, and ringing that notification bell. At number 9, the Awa tribe. With a known population of roughly 350 individuals, their story is one of resilience and struggle against the encroaching tide of modernity. Despite efforts by about 100 Awa members to remain uncontacted, their isolation has been compromised over the years. Escaping European incursions in the 1800s, they transitioned to a nomadic existence, seeking sanctuary amidst the forest's embrace. Their fight for survival took a promising turn in 1982 as the Brazilian government secured funding for their protection, but bureaucracy's languid dance delayed action for over 2 decades. Tragedy looms as illegal lodgers devastate their habitat, and even a young Awa girl met an unimaginable fate at their hands. Survival International, a human rights organization, warns that the Awa stand as the most threatened tribe globally. As their forest sanctuary vanishes at an alarming rate, the urgency for action intensifies to safeguard this tribe. At number 8 is the Moxa-Titu, one of the few remaining uncontacted tribes within the Yanomami people. This group resides in a forest region riddled with illegal miners. Their untouched existence harbors profound significance, echoing the heritage of their Yanomami counterparts. Reports from contacted Yanomami mention the sporadic sightings of Moxa-Titu, yet their isolated haven is under dire threat. The swarm of illegal miners introduces lethal diseases, endangering their health. Moreover, potential interactions between the tribe and miners entail catastrophic conflicts. The miners' practices, employing high-pressure hoses and mercury, devastate the land and contaminate the rivers. This contamination wreaks havoc on the flora and fauna, the tribe's sole source of sustenance. An alarming amplification of mercury-related health concerns looms over this tribe due to the pollutants. Consequently, venturing into their untouched realm might inadvertently catalyze their downfall, emphasizing the vital importance of safeguarding their isolation amidst lurking perils. At number 7 are the Sapanawa, residing in the uncontacted frontiers stretching across Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil, existing within a region teeming with uncontacted tribes, making it a unique hub of human isolation. A tragic turn of events thrust some Sapanawa into contact in 2014 when their homes fell victim to an outsider attack, leaving them with no choice but to connect with the outside world. This catastrophe was fueled by various factors, including illegal lodgers, substance smugglers, and even heedless missionaries in the area. The consequences are dire. Not only do the outsiders disrupt their way of life, but they inadvertently carry diseases that these tribes lack immunity against. While we might harbor defenses, these tribes remain vulnerable. The complex web of issues reminds us of the delicate balance between preserving cultural isolation and addressing the grave threats that encroach upon it. At number 6 are the Toromona. The Toromona, indigenous to Bolivia, dwell near the upper Madidi River and Heath River in the Amazon Basin's northwestern region. Their isolation remains remarkably intact, barring interactions even with other indigenous groups. Notably, a Norwegian biologist's vanishing in 1997 sparked a widespread fascination with the tribe. Although sporadic sightings persisted, the Toromona's existence largely evaded verification. An intriguing account arises from the Araona people, who discussed encountering a group voluntarily detached from the world on the Manurivi River's eastern bank. Although unconfirmed, these individuals are widely believed to be the Toromona. Bolivia's move to safeguard these uncontacted tribes manifested in a 2006 administrative resolution that cordoned off a pristine zone within the Madini National Park. This refuge stands as a testament to the determination to preserve the Toromona's autonomy and secluded way of life. At number 5, the aforementioned Ayorio, indigenous to the Grand Chaco in Bavaria and Paraguay, present a complex story. About 5,600 years ago, Ayorio individuals exist today, with roughly 100 adhering to the traditional nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle, untouched by modern society. Their history is marked by both contact and isolation. See, back in the 1700s, Jesuits aimed to convert them to Catholicism, but left them alone after the mission's abandonment. Fast forward to the 1900s, and the Chaco War introduced diseases and turmoil, portraying the Ario tribe as obstacles to both Bolivia and Paraguay. Soldiers were even encouraged to eliminate these tribesmen for their release. Missionaries' actions from the 1940s to the 1970s coerced Arios from their land, eradicating their culture. The tragic event of 1986 exposed the perils of forced contact, and today, both contacted and uncontacted Aorios face threats like deforestation, territorial disputes, oil exploitation, and discrimination. Delving into these threats would be fascinating, but let's maintain our pace. At number 4, the Carafawiana people are an extremely small group of only 50 people who remain extremely uncontacted, and so information on this particular tribe is quite scarce. They're located within the Amazon regions of Brazil, so like many of the other tribes that live in that area, they're threatened by illegal lodging, oil companies, and destruction of their land. It's believed that they practice a religion that's based on the other living creatures and things around them, such as plants and animals, but the specifics of this religion remain a mystery. They are a nomadic group of hunter-gatherers, and it's unclear if they partake in any kinds of agriculture or horticulture. While it would of course be super interesting to know about this tribe and their people, it's kind of refreshing to hear about a tribe we know so little about because they have mostly been left alone. Of course, that doesn't mean the outside world has been great to them, but just less worse. At number 3, the Mabuti tribe are an indigenous group in the Congo region of Africa. They are a contacted group, but they remain in voluntary isolation to continue their traditional ways of life. They are hunter-gatherers who see the forest as their protector. The forest is actually the basis for all of their mythology and spiritual beliefs, which is super cool. They live in villages, and each of these huts houses one family unit. They live in a fairly equal society, but they do have leaders, usually the men who are the best hunters. Despite remaining isolated, they do sometimes offer trades with outsiders and other indigenous tribes. The Mbuti are threatened for a few reasons because their territory is unprotected. Not only are they no longer allowed to hunt large game on their own land because of deforestation, gold mining, and modern influences from plantations, agriculturists, and efforts to conserve the forest, their food supply is threatened. If that wasn't enough, they've also been targets of mass euthanization campaign, which is absolutely horrifying. At number 2, the Deslala are an indigenous group of people in Brazil living under the lower Val do Javari in the western Amazon basin. These people are split into 2 groups, one splinter group led by a woman named Maya that's around 23 people, while the larger group is around 150. The split between these groups came from a dispute between around 20 members, and while the larger group remains quite isolated, the smaller group has had some infrequent contact with neighboring settlements. The hunting and war weapon of choice of this tribe is the club, but they're also known to use poison darts. Both the men and women of this tribe paint themselves with red dye that's made from plants. There's little that's known about their religious or spiritual practices, but it's known that they live in communal huts, which is something that's different from many of the uncontacted tribes in today's list. This tribe has a long history with the of indigenous people, so it makes sense that they want to remain isolated and have not welcomed outside contact very much since the 1950s. In 1996, there began expeditions to try and make peaceful contact, but this tribe are known to eliminate trespassers on their land, which we cannot truly blame them for, as the most recent known incident of this nature came in the year 2000 when 3 lumbermen were eliminated near the native reservation. At number 1, the Nukak are a tribe who live in the depths of the tropical forest, just on the fringe of the Amazon basin. They're nomadic hunter-gatherers, and they practice small-scale shifting horticulture. This tribe is a little different than the others on this list because of the fact that they aren't exactly considered uncontacted anymore. They were uncontacted up until about 1981, when they were contacted by the new tribe's mission, which is now called Ethnos 360. And since then, they've lost at least half of their tribe, mostly due to disease. Much of their territory has been used by coca growers, ranchers, and other settlers, as well as being occupied by guerrillas, army, and paramilitaries. Many of the Nukak still live their traditional lifestyles, but because of the growing threats to them, in 2006, a group of around 80 tribe members left the jungle to assimilate in an attempt to preserve their culture. One of the people in this group explained, "We do want to join the white family, but we do not want to forget the words of the Nukak."